The slave markets of Kethmoran Prime stank of desperation and broken dreams. Alien species from across the galaxy shuffled through the grimy corridors, their credits burning holes in their pockets as they searched for the perfect addition to their collections. Warriors, servants, entertainers, and laborers were all on display, each locked behind energy barriers that hummed with barely contained power. In the deepest, darkest corner of the market, where even the flickering lights seemed to give up hope, stood a cage that most visitors avoided. The creature inside was a pathetic sight by any measure. Standing barely 6 feet tall on 4 spindly legs, its coat was a patchwork of dull browns and grays, matted with neglect. Ribs showed through its thin hide, and its head hung low in defeat. This was Jector, though few bothered to remember his name. He was what the galactic community called a Kethmori war mount, bred for battle on the harsh desert worlds of the Outer Rim. But Jector was different from his proud ancestors. Where they had been magnificent beasts of war, standing 8 feet at the shoulder with muscles like coiled steel, Jector was small, weak, and utterly useless in combat. The Kethmori were a proud warrior race, standing 9 feet tall with skin like burnished copper and eyes that glowed like dying stars. They had conquered a dozen worlds riding creatures like Jector's ancestors, their war mounts carrying them into battle with the fury of desert storms. But the galactic wars had ended long ago, and now the Kethmori bred their mounts primarily for status symbols and arena fighting. Jector had failed at both. Born in the breeding pens of Kethmoran Prime, he had been the runt of his clutch. While his siblings grew strong and proud, Jector remained small and timid. His first owner, a wealthy Kethmori noble named Velthar the Magnificent, had purchased him hopping for a late bloomer. Instead, Jector had cowered during his first arena match, refusing to fight even the weakest opponents. Pathetic, Velthar had spat, his glowing eyes filled with disgust. You bring shame to your bloodline. From there, Jector had been sold from owner to owner, each one hopping to find some use for him. A Vorthak mining corporation had tried to use him as a pack animal, but his weak constitution meant he could barely carry half the load of a standard beast of burden. A Zelrani circus had attempted to train him as a performer, but his nervous disposition made him freeze under the bright lights and jeering crowds. Each failure had chipped away at what little confidence Jector possessed. He learned to expect disappointment, to anticipate the moment when his owners would realize he was worthless and sell him off again. The beatings had stopped hurting long ago. It was the look in their eyes that wounded him most deeply. That mixture of disgust and resignation that said he would never be anything more than a mistake. Now, 3 years after his birth, Jector found himself in the lowest tier of the slave markets. The dealer who owned him, a greasy hut-like creature named Blobbert, had given up trying to sell him to respectable buyers. Instead, he marketed Jector as a curiosity, a living reminder of genetic failure that might amuse the right kind of twisted buyer. Step right up, Blobbert would wheeze through his breathing apparatus. See the most pathetic war mount in the galaxy, perfect for those who want to feel better about their own failures. Most potential buyers took one look at Jector and moved on. A few cruel ones would point and laugh, making jokes about his size or weakness. Children would sometimes throw scraps of food at him, delighting in his flinching reactions. Through it all, Jector endured in silence, his spirit crushed but his body stubbornly clinging to life. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Blobbert was going through his usual routine, hosing down the cages with recycled water that smelled of industrial chemicals. The more valuable slaves got fed first, leaving Jector to wait for whatever scraps remained. He had learned not to hope for much. The market was busier than usual that day. Word had spread that a new shipment of exotic slaves had arrived from the frontier worlds, and buyers were eager to see what treasures might be available. Jector watched the crowds flow past his cage, their alien faces blending together in a sea of indifference. That's when he saw her. She was unlike anything Jector had ever seen before. Bipedal, standing about average height for a humanoid, but there was something different about the way she moved. Where other species seemed to flow or stride with purpose, she had an odd rolling gait that suggested both vulnerability and hidden strength. Her skin was a pale pink color, mostly hairless except for the dark brown fur that grew only from the top of her head. But it was her eyes that caught Jector's attention. They were brown like rich earth, and they held something he hadn't seen in years, genuine curiosity without cruelty. The strange creature stopped in front of his cage, tilting her head as she studied him. Jector instinctively backed away, expecting the usual pointing and laughing. Instead, she knelt down to bring herself closer to his eye level. "Hello there," she said in accented but understandable galactic standard. "What's your name?" Jector was so shocked by the question that he forgot to be afraid. No one had asked his name in over a year. "Jector," he whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. "Jector," she repeated, pronouncing it carefully. "I'm Sarah Chen, it's nice to meet you." Before Jector could respond, Blobbert came slithering over, his multiple chins wobbling with excitement at the sight of a potential customer. "Ah, an excellent choice, honored patron," the dealer wheezed. "This specimen represents a fascinating study in genetic failure, perfect for academic research or perhaps as a conversation piece for your home." Sarah stood slowly, and Jector noticed how her face changed when she looked at Blobbert. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. Blobbert launched into his usual sales pitch. "Oh, where do I begin? Too small for combat, too weak for labor, too nervous for entertainment. Bred from the finest HFY War mount stock, yet somehow manages to fail at everything. A true marvel of nature's capacity for disappointment." Jector felt his heart sink as he listened to the familiar litany of his failures. He watched Sarah's face, waiting for the inevitable look of disgust or amusement. Instead, her expression grew darker. "How much?" she asked quietly. Blobbert's eyes gleamed with greed. "For such a unique specimen, I'm afraid the price is quite." "How much?" Sarah repeated, her voice carrying an edge that made even Blobbert nervous. The dealer named a figure that was barely more than scrap value. Sarah pulled out a credit chip without hesitation, transferring the funds immediately. "I'll also need his registration documents and medical records," she said. Blobbert stammered something about additional fees, but one look at Sarah's face convinced him to comply without argument. Within minutes, the energy barrier around Jector's cage flickered and died. Sarah approached slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. "Hey there, Jector, how about we get you out of here?" Jector couldn't understand what was happening. He had been purchased again, but this time felt different. There was no discussion of his intended use, no examination of his muscles or temperament. This strange creature called Sarah had simply decided to buy him. As they walked through the market toward the exit, Jector became aware of the stares they were attracting. A small crowd began to follow them, pointing and whispering among themselves. He had never seen another creature like Sarah before, and apparently neither had anyone else. "What species are you?" asked a tall, blue-skinned alien with too many arms. "Human," Sarah replied without slowing down. The name meant nothing to Jector, but it caused a ripple of excitement through the crowd. Apparently, humans were either very rare or completely unknown in this part of the galaxy. They reached Sarah's ship at the spaceport, and Jector got his first surprise. It wasn't the sleek, expensive vessel he expected from someone wealthy enough to make impulse purchases at the slave market. Instead, it was a battered cargo hauler that looked like it had seen better decades. Scorch marks decorated its hull, and several panels had been replaced with parts that didn't quite match. "She's not much to look at," Sarah said, apparently noticing his expression. "But the Wanderers got me this far." The ship's cargo bay had been partially converted into living quarters. A small area had been sectioned off with what looked like sleeping accommodations for Jector, complete with soft bedding and feeding troughs. But more importantly, there were no bars, no energy barriers, no locks. "This will be your space," Sarah explained. "You can go anywhere on the ship you want, but I thought you might like having somewhere that's just yours." Jector stared at the setup in confusion. "I don't understand. What do you want me to do?" Sarah looked equally confused. You don't have to do anything, you're free now." Free, the concept was so foreign that Jector had trouble processing it. "But, you paid for me, I'm your property." Something flashed in Sarah's eyes, and for a moment, Jector saw the same dangerous expression she had shown Blobbert. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "No, Jector, you're not property. You're a living being with your own thoughts and feelings. I bought you to get you away from that place, not to own you." The war mount's legs trembled as he tried to understand what she was telling him. In his entire life, he had never encountered a concept like this. Freedom was something that happened to other creatures, not to failed war mounts like himself. "What happens when you get tired of me?" he asked, voicing his deepest fear. Sarah knelt down again, bringing herself to his eye level. That's not going to happen, Jector. But even if it did, I would never sell you or abandon you. We'd figure out what you wanted to do with your life. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. When he didn't move, she gently touched his neck, running her fingers through his matted fur. Right now, though, let's focus on getting you healthy and happy. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Jector couldn't remember. In the markets, he had been fed just enough to keep him alive, nothing more. Sarah disappeared into the ship's galley and returned with a bowl of what smelled like real food, not the processed slop he was used to. As he ate the first decent meal he'd had in months, Jector found himself studying his rescuer. Sarah moved around the ship with practiced efficiency, checking systems, and preparing for departure. Despite her small size and apparent physical limitations compared to the other species he'd encountered, there was something about her presence that commanded respect. The ship lifted off smoothly, leaving Kethmorin Prime behind. Through the small porthole in his new quarters, Jector watched the slave markets shrink into the distance. For the first time in his life, he was traveling not as cargo or property, but as... what? He wasn't sure what to call himself now. So, Sarah said, settling into the pilot's chair. Tell me about yourself, Jector. What do you like to do? The question was so unexpected that Jector almost laughed. I don't. I'm not good at anything. I'm a failed war mount. I can't fight, I can't carry heavy loads, I can't perform tricks. I'm useless. That's what other people have told you, Sarah said firmly. But what do you think? What makes you happy? Jector had to think about that. Happiness was not a concept he'd had much experience with, but slowly memories began to surface. I used to like listening to music. In one of the markets there was a musician who played near my cage sometimes. The melodies made me feel peaceful. Music, Sarah repeated, making a note on her datapad. What else? I liked watching the stars through the transport windows, and I enjoy learning about different places and peoples. The other slaves would sometimes tell stories about their homeworlds. Sarah smiled, and Jector realized it was the first genuine smile anyone had ever directed at him. Those are wonderful interests, she said. We're going to have plenty of opportunities to explore both music and travel. This ship's navigation computer has cultural databases from 100 worlds. As the days passed during their journey to whatever destination Sarah had in mind, Jector began to experience things he had never thought possible. Sarah treated him not as property or a burden, but as a companion. She asked his opinions on their route, shared her meals with him, and even played music from her personal collection through the ship's speakers. But more than the improved treatment, it was Sarah's attitude that amazed him. She spoke to him as an equal, assuming he had thoughts and feelings worth considering. When he made suggestions about ship maintenance based on his observations, she listened carefully and often implemented his ideas. You have good instincts, she told him after he identified a potential problem with the air recycling system. Have you ever worked on ships before? No, Jector admitted, but I spent a lot of time in transport vessels. You notice things when you're trying to stay out of the way. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Observational skills are incredibly valuable. Most people miss the details. It was the first time anyone had suggested he possessed a valuable skill. 3 weeks into their journey, they stopped at a frontier trading post to resupply. Jector expected to be left on the ship, as he always had been during his previous owner's business trips. Instead, Sarah invited him to accompany her. I could use the company, she explained. Besides, you might find the market interesting. They have vendors from all over this sector. Walking through the trading post beside Sarah, Jector felt a strange new sensation. Pride. Not pride in his accomplishments, but simply pride in being treated as a worthy companion. Other creatures stared at them, but their expressions held curiosity rather than mockery. At one vendor's stall, an elderly Zelrani merchant was selling musical instruments from various worlds. Sarah browsed the selection, occasionally picking up instruments and testing their sound. Do any of these interest you? She asked Jector. He hesitated, then pointed to a simple wooden flute designed for quadrupedal beings. That one has a nice tone. Sarah purchased it without hesitation. Every being should have something that brings them joy, she said, handing him the instrument. That night, as they traveled through hyperspace toward their still mysterious destination, Jector played his flute for the first time. The notes were hesitant and uncertain, but they were his own. Sarah listened from the pilot's area, occasionally offering encouragement or suggestions. "You're a natural," she said when he finished a simple melody he'd learned by ear. "Have you ever thought about composing your own music?" The idea had never occurred to him. Failed war mounts didn't compose music, but maybe, just maybe, Schecter the individual could. As he settled into his sleeping area that night, Schecter reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He still didn't understand why Sarah had chosen to rescue him or what her ultimate plans might be. But for the first time in his existence, he felt something he had never experienced before: hope. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new possibilities. And for the first time in his life, Schecter was eager to discover what they might be. The planet Nexus VII appeared on the view screen like a jewel against the black of space. Unlike the harsh, militaristic worlds Schecter had known, this planet seemed to glow with life. Green continents swirled with white clouds, and 3 small moons danced around it in perfect harmony. "Welcome to your new home," Sarah announced as she guided the wanderer through the planet's atmosphere. Schecter pressed his face to the porthole, watching in wonder as they descended through layers of clouds toward a sprawling city below. But this wasn't like the cramped, grimy urban centers he'd seen before. This city seemed to grow organically from the landscape, its buildings flowing like water between forests and rivers. "What is this place?" he asked. "Nexus VII is a neutral world," Sarah explained as she brought the ship in for landing at a modest spaceport. "It's where beings from all over the galaxy come to trade, learn, and start over. No one asks too many questions about your past here, and everyone gets a chance to find their own path." The spaceport bustled with activity, but it was different from the chaotic desperation of the slave markets. Here, beings of all species moved with purpose and dignity. Schecter saw families traveling together, merchants hawking exotic goods, and what looked like students carrying data tablets and instruments. As they disembarked from the Wanderer, Schecter noticed other beings staring at them again. But instead of the cruel amusement he was used to, their expressions held genuine curiosity and even admiration. "Is it true you're a human?" asked a young Kethmori female, her copper skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sarah nodded politely. "I am." "My professor says humans are legendary warriors," the young alien continued enthusiastically. "She says your species fought off 3 different galactic invasions using nothing but primitive technology and determination." Schecter looked at Sarah in surprise. She had never mentioned being a warrior, and she certainly didn't look like the battle-scarred soldiers he had seen in the markets. "History has a way of growing in the telling," Sarah replied diplomatically. "We did what we had to do to protect our world." As they walked through the city streets, Schecter was amazed by what he saw. Instead of the rigid hierarchies and oppressive atmosphere he had known, Nexus VII seemed to celebrate diversity. Street musicians played instruments from a dozen different worlds, food vendors offered cuisine from across the galaxy, and beings who would have been natural enemies elsewhere chatted peacefully together. Sarah led them to a modest but comfortable apartment building near the city center. The landlord, a rotund hut-like being with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Ah, Sarah, right on time. I have your apartment ready, and I've made the modifications you requested." The apartment was spacious by Schecter's standards, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. But what amazed him most was that it had been designed for both human and quadrupedal occupants. There were elevated platforms that brought him to the same level as Sarah for conversation, feeding areas designed for his anatomy, and even a small music alcove with instruments suitable for various species. "How did you know to prepare all this?" Schecter asked, still trying to process that someone had planned for his comfort. "I told Sarah about you weeks ago," the landlord explained kindly. "She wanted everything to be perfect for when you arrived." Schecter turned to stare at Sarah. "Weeks ago, but you only met me a month ago." Sarah looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have been planning your rescue for a little longer than I let on. I heard about you through some contacts in the trader networks. Word travels fast when something unusual happens, and apparently a war mount who refused to fight was unusual enough to be noticed. You came looking for me specifically. Let's just say I have a soft spot for beings who don't fit into the roles others expect them to fill," Sarah said with a smile. Over the following days, Sarah helped Schecter adjust to his new life. She enrolled him in basic education courses at the local learning center, where beings from across the galaxy could study whatever subjects interested them. For the first time in his life, Jector discovered the joy of learning for its own sake. His first class was basic galactic history, taught by an elderly Vulcan professor named Dr. Trendle. The professor was initially skeptical about having a HFY War mount in his class, but Jector's genuine enthusiasm for the subject quickly won him over. Most students see history as a collection of dates and battles, Dr. Trendle told Sarah during a parent-teacher conference. But Jector understands that history is about beings making choices that shape the future. His insights are quite remarkable. Jector also enrolled in music theory and composition classes. His instructor, a graceful Zelrani named Lyrazhin, was delighted to have a student with such natural ability. "Your musical instincts are exceptional," she told him after he performed his first original composition. "You have a gift for creating melodies that speak to the soul, regardless of species." But perhaps the most important change in Jector's life was his growing friendship with Sarah. As they spent their evenings together, sharing meals and conversation, he began to learn about the remarkable being who had rescued him. Sarah Chen was indeed human, a species that had achieved legendary status throughout the galaxy despite their relatively recent appearance on the galactic stage. Humans came from a world called Earth, located in what most considered a backwater system on the galaxy's outer rim. For millennia, they had developed in isolation, unaware that they shared the galaxy with thousands of other intelligent species. That changed when the Zephyrian Empire attempted to invade Earth 300 years ago. The Zephyrians had expected easy conquest of a primitive world. Instead, they encountered a species that combined innovative thinking, stubborn determination, and an almost supernatural ability to adapt under pressure. The first invasion fleet was expecting spears and arrows, Sarah explained one evening as they watched Nexus VII's 3 moons rise over the city. Instead, they found nuclear missiles and electromagnetic pulse weapons. Humans had been preparing for war against each other for so long that we were accidentally ready for war against aliens. The second invasion, 50 years later, had been even more decisive. By then, humans had reverse-engineered captured alien technology and improved upon it. The attacking fleet found Earth defended by weapons the invaders couldn't even identify. The third invasion never actually happened, Sarah continued. By that point, word had spread through the galaxy that attacking humans was a good way to lose your entire fleet. Instead, the various powers decided it was safer to offer us membership in the Galactic Council. "But you don't seem like a warrior," Jector observed. Sarah laughed. "Most humans aren't really. We just have this habit of rising to meet challenges, put us in an impossible situation, and we'll find a way to not only survive but thrive." "Is that why you rescued me? Because it was impossible?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I rescued you because everyone deserves a chance to discover who they really are. You'd never been given that chance." As weeks turned to months, Jector began to discover exactly who he was when freed from others' expectations. His music began to gain attention throughout the city, with beings from various species coming to hear his performances. His compositions had a unique quality that seemed to resonate across cultural boundaries, creating emotions that transcended species differences. Dr. Trendle invited him to contribute to a research project on pre-galactic civilizations, valuing his ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. Jector's natural observational skills, honed during years of trying to stay invisible, proved invaluable in archaeological work. But perhaps most surprisingly, he discovered he had a gift for helping other beings in situations similar to his own. Word of his transformation spread through the underground networks that connected the galaxy's forgotten and discarded. Soon, beings were seeking him out for advice and support. "You understand what it's like to be written off," explained a young Vorthak female who had been rejected from the mining corps due to her small size. "When you tell me I can find my own path, I believe it because you've done it." Sarah watched these developments with obvious pride, but also with careful attention. One evening, as they sat on their apartment balcony listening to the sounds of the city below, she brought up something that had been on her mind. "You've become quite influential," she observed. "Beings across the sector are talking about the war mount who found his own purpose." Jector shifted uncomfortably. "I haven't done anything special, I just shared my story." That's exactly what makes it special, Sarah replied. You're proving that beings don't have to accept the limitations others place on them. That's a powerful message. Is that bad? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Not bad, but potentially dangerous. There are forces in the galaxy that benefit from keeping beings in their assigned roles. They might not appreciate someone who encourages others to question those roles. As if summoned by her words, their peaceful evening was interrupted by a commotion in the street below. A group of Kethmori warriors in traditional armor had gathered near their building, their postures aggressive and hostile. "Jector of the broken chain," one of them shouted in the formal challenge language of his species. "Show yourself." Sarah stood immediately, her hand moving to something concealed beneath her jacket. "Stay here," she told Jector, but he was already moving toward the building's main entrance. "They're here for me," he said quietly. "I won't hide while others face danger on my behalf." The leader of the Kethmori warriors was a massive specimen, standing nearly 10 feet tall with scars covering his copper skin. His war mount was a perfect example of what Jector's species was supposed to be, all muscle and aggression. "I am war leader Kelthos of the Crimson Sands clan," the warrior announced. "You bring shame to all Kethmori with your pathetic existence. Challenge me to combat or be marked as a coward before all who witness." A crowd had gathered, beings from dozens of species watching with interest and concern. Jector could see the expectation in their faces. This was the moment when he would either prove himself or be revealed as the failure everyone had originally believed him to be. "I am not a warrior," Jector said calmly, stepping into the street. "I have no interest in proving myself through violence." Kelthos laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "As expected from a weakling who refuses his nature. Very well. If you will not fight, then you will submit to public execution as befits one who shames his bloodline." The war leader's mount pawed the ground eagerly, clearly anticipating violence. Around the crowd, Jector could see other beings preparing to either flee or intervene. The situation was moments away from erupting into chaos. That's when Sarah stepped forward. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," she said conversationally, walking to stand beside Jector. "You see, Jector is under human protection." Kelthos turned his glowing eyes toward her, his expression mixing confusion and disdain. "Human? What is this small creature to warriors of the Kethmori?" Sarah's smile was pleasant and completely terrifying. "I suppose you wouldn't know. Your people haven't tried to expand into human space for almost 2 centuries, not since the Battle of Proxima Station." Something shifted in the war leader's expression. "Battle of Proxima Station. Where Admiral Chen, my great-great-grandmother, convinced 3 Kethmori battle fleets to withdraw by destroying their command ship with a single modified cargo vessel." Sarah's voice remained conversational, but her posture had subtly changed. She now stood like a predator that had chosen not to attack yet. The crowd murmured with recognition. The Battle of Proxima Station was taught in military academies across the galaxy as an example of human tactical innovation. A single human had faced overwhelming odds and won through a combination of brilliant strategy and terrifying determination. "You're bluffing," Kelthos said, but his confidence was wavering. Sarah shrugged. "Feel free to test that theory, but you should know that Nexus VII has a standing agreement with the Human Defense Force. Any act of aggression against a being under human protection would be considered an act of war." She pulled out a small device and spoke into it in rapid human. A moment later, the sky filled with the sound of approaching aircraft. 3 sleek fighters in Human Defense Force colors streaked overhead before settling into a holding pattern above the street. Kelthos looked up at the fighters, then back at Sarah, then at Jector. The war leader's mount sensed its rider's uncertainty and began to shift nervously. "This is not over," Kelthos declared, but he was already backing away. "The shame of Jector will be known throughout the galaxy." "Actually," Jector said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "my name is no longer Jector of the Broken Chain. I am Jector of Nexus VII, composer, scholar, and friend to all beings who seek to define themselves." He stepped closer to the war leader, showing no fear despite the massive size difference. "And if my existence bothers you so much, perhaps you should ask yourself why. What are you so afraid of that a small, peaceful being threatens you?" Kelthos snarled, but couldn't find words to respond. The crowd watched in fascination as this tiny war mount faced down one of the most feared warriors in Kethmori space, armed with nothing but words and conviction. Finally, the war leader turned and stalked away, his followers trailing behind him. The crowd began to disperse, but many beings approached Jector to offer words of support and admiration. As the excitement died down, Sarah canceled the fighter patrol and turned to find Jector looking at her with new understanding. "You really are a warrior," he said. Sarah shook her head. "I'm someone who protects what matters to me. There's a difference." "And I matter to you." "More than you know," she replied. "You've become something I didn't expect when I first decided to rescue you." "What's that?" Sarah smiled, and in that smile, Jector saw warmth, pride, and something deeper than friendship. Family. That night, as they sat together on their balcony once again, Jector played a new composition on his flute. The melody spoke of transformation, of finding strength in unexpected places, and of the bonds that form between unlikely companions. In the distance, the lights of Nexus VII spread out like stars, each one representing a being who had found their own path among the infinite possibilities of the galaxy. And for the first time in his life, Jector knew exactly where he belonged. 6 months after the confrontation with Kelthos, Jector's life had settled into a rhythm that still amazed him with its normalcy. His morning routine began with meditation exercises Sarah had taught him, designed to center his mind and strengthen his confidence. Then came breakfast together, followed by his classes at the Learning Center and afternoon music practice. But today was different. Today, Dr. Trendle had asked him to present his research on pre-galactic trade routes to the Interspecies Archaeological Society's annual conference. It would be the first time Jector addressed such a prestigious gathering, and he couldn't shake his nervousness. "You'll be fine," Sarah assured him as she helped adjust the translation collar that would allow beings from across the galaxy to understand his presentation. "Your research is groundbreaking. You've identified trade patterns that professional archaeologists missed for decades." Jector's work had indeed attracted significant attention. His unique perspective as someone who had been transported across multiple star systems as cargo had given him insights into ancient trade routes that others had overlooked. He could identify the subtle signs of established shipping lanes, the markers that indicated safe harbors, and the patterns that suggested regular commercial traffic. "What if they ask questions I can't answer?" he worried, adjusting his presentation materials for the third time. "Then you say you don't know and promise to research it further," Sarah replied practically. "The greatest scholars in the galaxy got there by admitting when they needed to learn more." The conference was being held at the Grand Assembly Hall, a massive structure that could accommodate beings of all sizes and environmental needs. As they arrived, Jector was overwhelmed by the diversity of species present. He saw crystalline beings from the Silicon Nebula gaseous entities contained in specialized environment suits, and creatures so alien that he couldn't even determine how they moved. Dr. Trendle met them at the entrance, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of excitement. "Jector, I have wonderful news. The keynote speaker has specifically requested to meet you after your presentation." "Who's the keynote speaker?" Sarah asked. "Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Human Exploration Institute. She's the foremost expert on first contact protocols and interspecies cultural exchange." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Elena Vasquez is here. She's practically a legend in human space." Jector felt a flutter of panic. "A legend wants to meet me." "She's particularly interested in your work because it demonstrates something humans have long suspected but never been able to prove," Dr. Trendle explained. "That intelligence and wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources." The presentation went better than Jector had dared hope. His nervousness faded as he became absorbed in explaining his discoveries. He used holographic displays to show how ancient shipping routes connected distant star systems, creating trade networks that had existed thousands of years before the current galactic civilization. "The key insight," he explained to the rapt audience, "is that these routes weren't established by any single species. They represent the accumulated knowledge of dozens of different civilizations, each contributing their understanding of local conditions and safe passage." During the question period, a distinguished Vorthak archaeologist challenged one of his conclusions about mineral trading patterns. Instead of defending his position blindly, Schechter acknowledged the weakness in his data and suggested a collaborative study to resolve the discrepancy. The audience erupted in appreciative murmurs. In academic circles, the ability to accept criticism gracefully was often more valued than being right. After his presentation, Schechter was surrounded by beings eager to discuss his work or propose collaborations. For someone who had spent most of his life being ignored or mocked, the attention was overwhelming but wonderful. That's when Dr. Elena Vasquez approached. She was a tall, dignified woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that held the kind of sharp intelligence Schechter was learning to recognize in exceptional beings. What struck him most was the way she carried herself, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent her life pushing the boundaries of knowledge. "Schechter," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "It's an honor to meet you. Your presentation was remarkable." "Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Trendle tells me you're the expert on first contact protocols." She smiled. "Among other things, but today I'm more interested in you. Your story represents something extraordinary, not just academically, but culturally." "I'm not sure I understand." Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a quieter area where they could speak more privately. Sarah followed at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them space. "Tell me," Dr. Vasquez began, "what do you know about the concept of emergent intelligence?" Schechter thought for a moment. In systems theory, it refers to complex behaviors that arise from simple interactions. "Exactly. Now apply that to galactic civilization. We have thousands of species, each with their own cultures, abilities, and perspectives. But until recently, most of the galaxy operated under rigid hierarchies that limited how those different perspectives could interact and create new possibilities." She paused, studying his expression. "You represent something new, Schechter. You're proof that when beings are freed from artificial limitations, they can develop capabilities no one expected. I still don't understand why that's significant beyond my personal circumstances." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. "Because you're not unique. Across the galaxy, there are millions of beings who have been written off, dismissed, or forced into roles that don't match their true potential. Your success proves that those beings could contribute in ways we can't even imagine." The implications of what she was saying began to dawn on Schechter. "You think there are others like me?" "I know there are. The question is how we find them and create environments where they can thrive." Over the following hour, Dr. Vasquez outlined a proposal that took Schechter's breath away. She wanted to establish a network of educational and cultural centers throughout the galaxy, places where beings could explore their interests without regard to their species' traditional roles or societal expectations. "We would call it the Infinite Potential Initiative," she explained. "Centers like Nexus VII, but specifically designed to identify and nurture unexpected talents." "That sounds wonderful, but what does it have to do with me?" "We want you to be one of the founding directors. Your experience, both as someone who overcame limitations and as someone who now helps others do the same, makes you uniquely qualified." Schechter felt overwhelmed. "I'm just a failed war mount who learned to play music and study history." Dr. Vasquez shook her head firmly. "You're a living example of the fact that there are no such things as failures, only beings who haven't found their proper context. That's exactly the message this initiative needs to convey." Sarah, who had been listening with growing excitement, finally spoke up. "This could help millions of beings across the galaxy." "Billions," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "And the benefits wouldn't just be individual. Imagine the innovations, the art, the scientific breakthroughs that could come from minds that think differently because they've experienced the galaxy from unique perspectives." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance of the assembly hall. A group of figures in military armor had arrived, and their presence was causing visible distress among the conference attendees. "HFY War cast," Dr. Vasquez observed grimly. "This doesn't look like a social visit." Leading the group was Kelthos, the war leader who had challenged Schechter months earlier. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him marched 20 of the most elite HFY warriors, their armor gleaming with the symbols of their military honors. "Schechter the Aberrant," Kelthos announced in a voice that carried throughout the hall, "you will answer for your crimes against the natural order." Dr. Vasquez stepped protectively in front of Jector. This is a neutral academic gathering. Violence is prohibited by interstellar law. Kelthas's laugh was cold. We are not here for violence, human scholar. We come with an official decree from the Kethmori High Council. He produced a ceremonial scroll that glowed with official seals. Jector of the Broken Chain has been declared a genetic aberration whose existence corrupts the purity of our species. He is to be removed from galactic society and placed in permanent isolation. A murmur of shock ran through the assembled beings. Even in a galaxy where individual rights varied greatly between species, the idea of imprisoning someone for their genetic makeup was considered barbaric by most civilized standards. That's insane, Sarah said, stepping forward. Jector hasn't committed any crime. His crime is existing in defiance of his nature, Kelthas replied. War mounts who refuse to be war mounts create doubt among others of their kind. This cannot be permitted. Dr. Vasquez's expression had gone from concerned to dangerously calm. I see. And tell me, war leader, what gives the Kethmori the authority to make such decrees about beings who are no longer under your jurisdiction? Genetic heritage transcends political boundaries. Does it? Dr. Vasquez pulled out her own datapad and began reading from it. According to Galactic Treaty 4471, no species may claim authority over individuals who have legally emigrated to neutral worlds, unless those individuals have committed crimes against their birth species or their new homes. She looked up at Kelthas with the expression of someone about to demolish an opponent's argument. Has Jector committed any such crimes? The war leader hesitated. He has influenced others to abandon their proper roles. Ah, so you're here to arrest someone for giving academic presentations and encouraging personal growth. How very traditional of you. The sarcasm in her voice was so thick it could have been cut with a blade. Around the hall, beings from dozens of species were beginning to look actively hostile toward the Kethmori warriors. But Kelthas wasn't finished. Perhaps you do not understand, human. This decree has the support of several major powers who believe that social stability requires beings to accept their designated functions. He gestured, and additional figures emerged from behind his warriors. Jector recognized representatives from the Vorthak Corporate Collective, the Zelrani Entertainment Syndicate, and several other organizations that relied on rigid social hierarchies to maintain their power. The question, announced a tall Vorthak executive, is whether this gathering values order and stability, or whether it chooses to support dangerous individualism that threatens the structure of galactic society. The hall fell silent as beings processed what they were hearing. This wasn't just about Jector anymore. It was about the fundamental question of whether individuals had the right to define themselves, or whether society could force them into predetermined roles. Dr. Vasquez looked around the hall, taking the measure of the assembled beings. Then she stepped onto the main stage, activating the amplification system. Colleagues, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast space, we are witnessing something historic, not because of the specific threat being made, but because of what our response will reveal about who we are as a galactic civilization. She paused, letting her words sink in. The beings before us represent an old way of thinking, one that says intelligence and potential can be predetermined by genetics or species membership. They ask us to sacrifice one individual to preserve their vision of order. Her voice grew stronger. But science teaches us that diversity creates strength, that new ideas come from unexpected sources, and that the greatest discoveries often come from those who think differently. She gestured toward Jector. This being has contributed more to our understanding of galactic history in 6 months than some researchers achieve in entire careers. He has inspired others to pursue their own potential. He has proven that the categories we use to limit each other are artificial constructs. Dr. Vasquez's eyes swept the assembly, meeting the gaze of beings from dozens of species. So I ask you, colleagues, what kind of galaxy do you want to live in? One where potential is predetermined and limited, or one where every being has the chance to discover what they might become? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Beings throughout the hall rose to their feet, creating a cacophony of voices speaking in dozens of languages, but all expressing the same sentiment: support for Jector and rejection of the ultimatum. A distinguished crystalline being from the Silicon Nebula stepped forward, its translation device crackling to life. The collective of pure thought officially protests this attempt to criminalize intellectual development. An aquatic being in an environment suit added, "The Deep Current Federation recognizes only the authority of evidence and reason, not genetic determinism." One by one, representatives from major academic institutions, neutral worlds, and independent organizations declared their opposition to the Kethmari demand. What had started as an attempt to isolate Jector had become a massive demonstration of support for the principles he represented. Kelthas looked around the hall with growing alarm. His simple mission to retrieve an aberrant war mount had turned into a political disaster that could damage Kethmari relations with half the galaxy. "This changes nothing," he declared, though his confidence was clearly shaken. "The decree stands. Jector will return with us." "Actually," said Dr. Vasquez pleasantly, "he won't." She produced her own datapad and activated a legal document. "As of this moment, Jector has been granted emergency citizenship in the human commonwealth under our Refugee Protection Act. Any attempt to remove him by force would constitute an act of war." Sarah smiled grimly. "And as Dr. Vasquez can tell you, humans have a very strict policy about protecting our citizens." The threat hung in the air like a weapon. Everyone in the hall knew the stories of what happened to those who threatened human citizens. The galaxy was littered with the wreckage of fleets that had underestimated human determination to protect their own. Kelthas stared at Jector for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to his warriors. "We withdraw, but this matter is not concluded." As the Kethmari contingent filed out, followed by their corporate allies, the hall erupted in celebration. Beings who had never met Jector before were approaching to congratulate him and offer support for Dr. Vasquez's Infinite Potential initiative. But Jector barely noticed the celebration. He was staring at Dr. Vasquez and Sarah, trying to process what had just happened. "I'm a human citizen now?" he asked quietly. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "If you want to be, the offer is genuine, though you're free to make your own choice about whether to accept it permanently." Jector looked at Sarah, who was watching him with obvious emotion. "What does it mean to be human?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "It means you're part of a species that believes every being deserves the chance to become the best version of themselves. It means you're protected by people who will stand against impossible odds to defend what's right. And it means you have a family that will never give up on you." Jector felt tears forming in his eyes. "Then yes, I want to be human." Dr. Vasquez smiled. "Welcome to the family, Jector Chen." The addition of the human family name felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Jector Chen, human citizen, scholar, musician, and living proof that the universe was full of infinite possibilities for those brave enough to pursue them. 2 years had passed since Jector Chen gained human citizenship, and the Infinite Potential initiative had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had started as a single center on Nexus VII had expanded into a network of 43 facilities across 12 star systems, each one dedicated to helping beings discover and develop their true capabilities. Jector stood on the observation deck of the initiative's flagship facility, a massive space station called Haven that orbited the neutral world of New Geneva. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see shuttle traffic flowing constantly between the station and the planet below, carrying beings from across the galaxy who had come seeking the chance to redefine themselves. "The morning reports," announced Arya, the station's artificial intelligence, as holographic displays materialized around him. "We currently have 47,329 students enrolled across all facilities, representing 1,847 different species. This week's new enrollments include 3 beings previously classified as non-sentient by their home governments." Jector nodded, still amazed by the numbers. Each student represented someone like his former self, a being who had been written off or forced into a role that didn't match their true potential. The success stories were incredible, but they also brought challenges he had never anticipated. "Any security concerns?" he asked. 17 different governments have filed formal protests about our corruption of their citizens," Arya replied with what Jector had learned to recognize as her version of dry humor. The Kethmori High Council has increased their reward for your capture to 5 million galactic credits. On the positive side, 6 major corporations have offered to fund new research facilities. The political situation had grown increasingly complex as the initiative's influence spread. For every being who found their true calling through the program, there was a government or corporation that lost a compliant worker or soldier. The old powers of the galaxy were starting to push back, and some of their methods were becoming dangerous. Sarah entered the observation deck carrying 2 cups of coffee and a datapad full of reports. Her role had evolved from Schechter's rescuer to the initiative's director of human relations, coordinating with the dozen human worlds that had thrown their support behind the project. "How are our new refugees settling in?" she asked, handing him one of the cups. "Better than expected. The Vorthak miners we evacuated from the Kepler system are already showing remarkable aptitude for artistic expression. It turns out that spending your life digging in dangerous tunnels gives you unique insights into sculpture and 3-dimensional design." Sarah smiled, and the former entertainment slaves from the Zelrani Syndicate. 3 of them have discovered they have genius-level mathematical abilities. Dr. Chen thinks one of them might revolutionize quantum physics if given proper resources. It still felt strange to refer to Dr. Alina Vasquez as Dr. Chen, but she had insisted on taking the human family name when she formally adopted Schechter as her son. The symbolic gesture had sent shockwaves through both human space and the broader galaxy, making it clear that humanity's protection of the initiative wasn't just political convenience. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from Arya. "Priority communication incoming from Earth. Admiral Chen requesting immediate conference." Schechter felt a flutter of nervousness. Communications from Earth usually meant significant developments in the political situation. Admiral Marcus Chen, Sarah's uncle and the commander of the Human Defense Force, rarely contacted them unless there were serious security concerns. The holographic display materialized to show a grizzled man in his 60s wearing the dark blue uniform of the HDF. His expression was grim. "Schechter, Sarah," he greeted them. "We have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention." "What kind of situation?" Sarah asked. "The kind that could destroy everything you've built. 3 days ago, our intelligence networks detected unusual military activity among several major powers. The Kethmori Empire, Vorthak Corporate Collective, and Zelrani Entertainment Syndicate have formed something they're calling the Stability Coalition." Schechter's heart sank. "Let me guess, they want to shut down the initiative." "Worse than that, they want to make an example that will discourage any other attempts at social disruption. We have reliable intelligence that they're planning a coordinated attack on Haven Station." The blood drained from Sarah's face. That would be an act of war against human citizens and neutral territory. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. "Which is exactly what we told them. Their response was that they consider the initiative an existential threat to galactic stability. They're willing to risk war to stop it." Schechter stared at the holographic display, trying to process the implications. "How long do we have?" "Their fleets are still assembling, but our analysts estimate no more than 2 weeks. The combined force will be massive, at least 300 warships." "And the Human Defense Force response?" Admiral Chen's expression grew even grimmer. "We have 47 ships in this sector, with reinforcements at least a month away. Normally, I'd be confident in our ability to handle a numerically superior force, but this is different. They're not coming to conquer territory or capture resources. They're coming to destroy everything and everyone connected to the initiative." Sarah began packing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. What about the other neutral powers? Surely they won't stand by and watch the destruction of a humanitarian organization. Some are expressing concern, but none are willing to commit military forces. The Stability Coalition has made it clear that anyone who interferes will be considered an enemy. Schechter felt a familiar despair creeping over him. "So it's over, all those beings who found hope through the initiative." "No," Sarah said sharply, turning to face him. "It's not over. There has to be another way." Admiral Chen leaned forward in the display. "Actually, there might be. It's risky and unprecedented, but it could work." "What do you have in mind?" Schechter asked. "The Stability Coalition's entire strategy depends on the idea that the initiative represents a small group of troublemakers that can be eliminated quickly and decisively. But what if they found themselves facing not dozens of potential enemies, but millions? Sarah's eyes widened as she understood. A general uprising. Exactly. Every being who has been helped by the initiative, every world that has sent students here, every organization that has benefited from your research. If they all stood together. Jector shook his head. That's not realistic. Most of our students come from powerless groups. They don't have armies or fleets. They don't need armies, Admiral Chen replied. They need something much more powerful, the truth, and they need a symbol that can unite beings across species lines. The Admiral's gaze focused on Jector. They need you. The suggestion hit Jector like a physical blow. Me? I'm not a leader or a warrior. I'm just a former slave who learned to play music. You're the living proof that change is possible, Sarah said softly. Every being in the galaxy who has ever felt powerless or dismissed sees their own potential when they look at your story. Admiral Chen nodded. The Coalition thinks they're facing a few rebels. Show them they're actually facing a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization operates. Over the following days, the plan that emerged was audacious in its scope and ambitious in its goals. Using the initiative's communication networks and the personal connections of its students, they would attempt to coordinate the largest peaceful demonstration in galactic history. The message was simple but powerful. Beings from every species and world would gather in their local space, forming a protective barrier around Haven Station and the other initiative facilities. Not to fight, but simply to bear witness and say, "We exist, we matter, and we will not be silenced." Jector found himself at the center of the coordination effort, his quarters converted into a communication hub where holographic displays showed representatives from hundreds of worlds. The response was overwhelming. The Crystalline Collective is mobilizing every available ship, reported the silicon-based beings from the Corona Nebula. Our philosophy has always been that consciousness transcends physical form. We will defend that principle. A representative from the aquatic worlds of the Deep Current Federation added, Our youth have been inspired by the initiative's teachings. 37 worlds have pledged their support. Even more surprising were the messages from individual beings within the Stability Coalition's own territories. Kethmari citizens who had been educated at initiative facilities, Vorthak workers who had discovered artistic talents, Zelrani entertainers who had found their own voices. We may not be able to stop our governments, transmitted a young Kethmari female, but we can make sure the galaxy knows we exist and that we choose differently. Dr. Alina Vasquez arrived on Haven Station 3 days before the Coalition fleet was expected. Despite being in her 70s, she threw herself into the coordination effort with the energy of someone half her age. This is what we always hoped for, she told Jector as they watched the tactical displays showing the gathering fleets. Not the conflict itself, but the proof that the initiative has created something larger than any of us imagined. By the day before the expected attack, the space around Haven Station and every initiative facility had been filled with ships from across the galaxy. Not warships for the most part, but civilian vessels, research ships, transports, and personal craft. Millions of beings had come to stand witness. The Coalition fleet arrived precisely on schedule, emerging from hyperspace in perfect military formation. 300 warships representing the combined might of 3 major galactic powers, armed with enough firepower to reduce Haven Station to its component atoms. Admiral Chen's voice came through on the general communication frequency, calm and professional. Coalition fleet, you are entering neutral territory protected by international treaty and currently occupied by civilian vessels. Please state your intentions. The response came from war leader Kelthas, whose personal flagship led the Kethmari contingent. We are here to remove the aberration known as Jector and destroy the facility that has corrupted so many of our people. I see, Admiral Chen replied, and you plan to accomplish this how exactly? For the first time, there was uncertainty in Kelthas's voice. You will order the civilian vessels to disperse. I'm afraid I don't have the authority to order civilian vessels in neutral space to do anything. You'll have to ask them yourself. What followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. For 6 hours, representatives from the Coalition fleet attempted to convince the gathered civilian ships to leave. They offered bribes, made threats, appealed to species loyalty, and even tried to claim legal authority. The response was unanimous: no. Jector watched from Haven Station's command center as the Coalition fleet found itself in an impossible position. They had come prepared for a quick, decisive strike against a small target. Instead, they faced the prospect of opening fire on millions of civilians from hundreds of different worlds, including many from their own territories. They can't attack without committing genocide, Sarah observed. And if they withdraw without accomplishing their mission, they'll look weak to their own people. So what will they do? Jector asked. As if in answer to his question, Kelthos's image appeared on the general communication frequency. The war leader looked haggard, as if the past few hours had aged him years. Jector the Aberrant, he said formally, I challenge you to single combat. If you defeat me, our fleets will withdraw and never return. If I defeat you, the station surrenders and the initiative ends. The command center fell silent. Everyone knew that Jector had never fought a battle in his life, while Kelthos was one of the most feared warriors in Kethmori space. That's ridiculous, Sarah said immediately. It's obviously a trap. But Dr. Vasquez was studying Jector's expression with growing understanding. He's going to accept, isn't he? Jector nodded slowly. It's the only way to end this without bloodshed. It's suicide, Admiral Chen's voice protested over the communication link. Maybe, Jector replied, but sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice. He activated the general frequency, his voice carrying to every ship in the vast gathering. War Leader Kelthos, I accept your challenge, but I propose a modification to the terms. What modification? Jector took a deep breath. Let this be settled not by violence but by truth. You claim I am an aberration whose existence threatens stability. I claim that every being deserves the chance to define themselves. Let the gathered witnesses judge who speaks truly. A murmur ran through the communication networks as beings from hundreds of species discussed this unprecedented proposal. Single combat was a recognized institution throughout the galaxy, but a battle of ideas was something entirely new. Kelthos looked uncertain. That is not traditional. Neither is gathering 300 warships to attack a school, Jector replied. If you're truly confident in the righteousness of your cause, surely you can defend it with words as well as weapons. The war leader found himself trapped by his own rhetoric. After declaring his mission to be morally justified, he could hardly refuse to defend it in open debate. Very well, he said finally, let us settle this with truth. What followed was broadcast throughout the galaxy, watched by billions of beings as two very different philosophies faced off in the space between fleets. Kelthos argued passionately for the importance of order, tradition, and acceptance of one's place in the universe. Jector spoke quietly but powerfully about the right of every consciousness to grow, learn, and become something greater than their origins suggested. But the real power came from the testimony of those who had been touched by the initiative. One by one, beings from across the galaxy shared their stories. The Vorthak miner who had become a renowned sculptor, the Zelrani entertainer who had discovered a talent for quantum physics, the Kethmori warrior who had found peace through music. As the hours passed, it became clear that the debate had transcended its original purpose. This wasn't just about the fate of the initiative anymore. It was about the kind of galaxy they all wanted to live in. When the formal debate ended, the gathered fleets voted. Not through government representatives or military commanders, but through individual beings making individual choices about what they believed to be right. The result was overwhelming. Species after species, world after world, the vote was the same. The initiative would continue, and the right of beings to define themselves would be protected. Kelthos stared at the results in disbelief. Even many ships from his own fleet had voted against him. How, he asked, his voice barely audible. Jector's response was gentle. Because the universe is bigger than any of us imagined, and there's room in it for everyone to find their place. The war leader looked at him for a long moment, then slowly began to remove his battle armor. Perhaps I have been wrong. The coalition fleet withdrew, but not in defeat. Many ships remained, their crews requesting permission to visit the initiative facilities and learn more about what they offered. The crisis had ended not in victory for one side or the other, but in a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization thought about individual potential. That evening, as Jector stood once again on Haven Station's observation deck, Sarah joined him to watch the spectacular display of ships from 1,000 worlds still gathered in protective formation around their home. "So what happens now?" she asked. Jector smiled, thinking of all the beings across the galaxy who were, at this very moment, taking their first steps toward discovering who they really were. "Now we get back to work. There are still a lot of beings out there who don't know what they're capable of." In the distance, the stars shone with infinite possibility. 5 years had passed since the Great Awakening, as historians had come to call the events at Haven Station. The galaxy had changed in ways that would have been unimaginable just a decade earlier. The rigid hierarchies that had once defined interspecies relationships were crumbling, replaced by fluid networks of cooperation and mutual support. Jector Chen stood before the largest gathering of beings in galactic history. The Infinite Potential Congress met every 3 years on rotating worlds, bringing together representatives from over 5,000 species to share discoveries, coordinate research, and celebrate the ongoing transformation of galactic civilization. This year's Congress was being held on Earth, humanity's homeworld, and Jector could hardly contain his excitement. After years of hearing stories about the legendary cradle of human civilization, he was finally going to experience it firsthand. The Congress venue was itself a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Built in the vast spaces above Earth's Pacific Ocean, the floating city of New Harmony had been designed to accommodate beings with radically different physiological needs. Aquatic species could attend sessions in massive water-filled chambers, while crystalline beings had areas with specialized lighting and resonance fields. The architecture flowed seamlessly between environmental zones, creating a sense of unity despite the incredible diversity. "Welcome, friends, to the 5th Infinite Potential Congress," Jector began, his words translated simultaneously into over 3,000 languages. 5 years ago, many of us stood together in space, united by a simple belief that every consciousness deserves the chance to grow beyond the limitations others place upon them. The audience was breathtaking in its scope. Beings from every corner of the galaxy filled the vast amphitheater, their forms representing millions of years of evolutionary diversity. Yet despite their differences, they shared something fundamental: the understanding that intelligence and potential could emerge from the most unexpected sources. "Today, I want to share with you a story," Jector continued. "Not my story, though that's part of it, but the story of what we've accomplished together." The holographic displays around the amphitheater lit up with images from across the galaxy. Former slaves who had become renowned artists, warriors who had discovered gifts for healing, corporate drones who had revolutionized science and philosophy. When the initiative began, we had one small center on one neutral world. Today, we operate in every major star system, with over 10 million beings enrolled in our programs. But those numbers only tell part of the story. The images shifted to show the broader transformation of galactic society. The Kethmori Empire had restructured its military to focus on exploration and rescue operations rather than conquest. The Vorthak Corporate Collective had become a cooperative federation where workers shared ownership and decision-making. Even the Zelrani Entertainment Syndicate had evolved into a collaborative network supporting artists from across the galaxy. The real story is not about institutions, but about individuals who chose to believe in themselves and in each other. A special section of the audience contained beings who had been present at the Great Awakening. Jector could see Kelthos, the former war leader who now directed the Kethmori Cultural Exchange Program. The massive warrior had discovered an unexpected talent for poetry, creating works that bridged the gap between ancient traditions and new possibilities. Beside him sat Captain Velnara, a former Vorthak overseer who had risked her career to testify on behalf of her workers' right to pursue their own interests. She now headed the Cooperative Development Initiative, helping transform corporate hierarchies into collaborative enterprises. But perhaps the most important story is one that's still being written. In the past year alone, we've welcomed our first representatives from 3 species that were previously classified as non-sentient by the galactic scientific community. A section of the audience rippled with excitement as attention focused on a group of beings whose crystalline forms pulsed with complex patterns of light. The Sithrak had been dismissed for centuries as beautiful but mindless geological formations. It had taken a student at one of the initiative's research stations to recognize that their light patterns were actually a sophisticated form of mathematical communication. Today, the Sithrak are contributing groundbreaking insights into quantum mechanics and multidimensional geometry. Their unique perspective on reality has opened entirely new fields of scientific inquiry. Similar discoveries had been made throughout the galaxy. The whisper plants of Andromeda, once considered exotic decorations, had revealed themselves to be ancient philosophers with insights into long-term ecological balance. The tide dancers of the Oceanic Nebula, thought to be simple energy patterns, had proven to be master storytellers whose narratives span geological time scales. Each discovery reminds us that intelligence takes forms we're only beginning to understand, and that consciousness may be far more common in the universe than we ever imagined. Dr. Alina Vasquez, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, rose from the honorary section to address the assembly. Though she needed assistance walking, her voice remained strong and clear. "My friends," she began, "when I first proposed the Infinite Potential Initiative, I thought we might help a few thousand beings discover their true capabilities. I never imagined we would end up transforming the very nature of galactic civilization." She jest,